If there is a Mount Rushmore for progressive broadcasters, those who articulate sound, clear takes on progressive politics, Thom Hartmann would definitely be up there. He's an international bestseller. He's a broadcaster who reaches, I had no idea, 500 million homes worldwide. And he's been good enough to occasionally stop through this world. How about it for Thom Hartmann, everybody? Hello, sir.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Great to see you again.
It's great to see you always. And I watched the total takeover of our government by a bunch of mega rich guys. I watched that, and I think back to a book that you did. Is it the American History of the American History of the American Oligarchy? What was it, Thom? The book you did?
Hidden History of American Oligarchy.
Hidden History. Your Hidden History series is just terrific. And so that Hidden History of American Oligarchy, along with some of your other writings, touch on this possibility that our democratic republic could indeed be captured by the wealthiest people on earth. It appears that that's happening, and they all have fealty to Donald Trump. So as I saw this happening in slow motion, of course, it's really slow motion. We've seen the Musk orbit and the Bezos orbit and the Zuckerbergs and the way that they have gone to Mar-a-Lago and bent at the knee to this guy. But they're obviously going to extract something from him. I thought, gosh, I'd love to have a few minutes to talk to you about what's happening in American government right now.
Yeah, well, this is not new. This is something that we saw in ancient Rome. The richest guy in Rome, his name was Marcus Licinius Crassus, basically was offended by the free bread for all welfare state of democratic Rome. Rome was democratic for about 500 years. And he funded, just political gridlock, the Roman equivalent of Newt Gingrich, to create basically warfare within the Roman Senate. And this led to popular discontent. It led to the rise of populism. And ultimately, it led to Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon River and seizing Rome. And, just a few years later, when Augustus Caesar took over, that was just the end of 500 years, half a millennia of Roman democracy. And I think that we are damn close to a very similar point right now. In fact, I was just writing about that for tomorrow's Hartmann Report newsletter. Great minds think alike here, Mark.
What does that look like in the modern age then?
Well, it looks like oligarchy typically and classically does, which is basically ruled by the rich for the rich. It's when the resources and assets of the nation, including its labor force and its taxpayers, are redirected towards serving a small group of oligarchs, essentially. The problem with oligarchy, and I get into that in some detail in the book, the big problem with oligarchy, and we've flirted with it in this country 3 times now, by the way. One led to the Civil War. One led to the kind of eruption in the 1890s with the Sherman Antitrust Act and whatnot that carried on through the Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft administrations. And then the third one was, at the end of at the beginning, I guess, the Republican Great Depression with the rise of FDR, ending the oligarchs and putting them back in their place. And now we're in this fourth kind of tranche of it. But the big problem with oligarchy is that it's a transitional form of government. Oligarchy is not stable. It rarely lasts more than a generation. And the reason why is because people get pissed off. Hey, the rich guys are getting everything and I'm getting screwed. I mean, that just becomes the consensus opinion. And so they start demanding change. And typically oligarchies flip in one of 2 directions. Either like America has 3 times now, they flip back to democracy, or like Hungary has done and India is doing and the Philippines did. And I mean, I could give you a dozen examples, Egypt, et cetera. They flip into tyranny. And we're at that, we're on that knife's edge right now.
It's interesting because the door to the tyranny we've seen kicked open by the MAGA faithful and by Trump as their leader. And the oligarchs have sort of drafted on that. They've found their way through Trump. And so these 2 things coexist. But as you describe it, they merge. And so the authoritarian tendencies of Trump and the like they may be well served in a sense by the oligarchical takeover of our government.
Well, we now have a Caesarist movement within the GOP. It was really started, I think you could argue, by Curtis Yarvin, 15 years ago or so, the philosopher king who J.D. Vance is a big follower of,
right.
Who actually openly called for it. And although his original take was that FDR and Lincoln and Washington were kind of Caesarists, strong men who got things done, and that's what we need. And now, Kevin Roberts, the head of the Heritage Foundation, is another one of these big Caesarists. I mean, these guys are calling basically for strongman rule. They think that that's the only thing. I mean, we've had 25, 30 years now of gridlock and political warfare funded by right-wing billionaires and acted out by the GOP, initially with Newt Gingrich making, the destruction of norms, of reasonable behavior among politicians and things like that. And the concentration of both wealth and power in an increasingly small number of hands. So we're there.
You saw Newt Gingrich sort of become patient zero in creating the contagion that was the hyper-partisan Washington and the virtue in that. But this rise of the oligarchy seems supercharged by social media and the new media environment. And obviously there's one of those oligarchs who's Elon Musk, who has been, who took over X, certainly got his money's worth, and now may be granted TikTok. I mean, I don't know to what extent he'll have buy-in on that, but the notion of sort of a monopolization of these social media platforms, it's gone away. I mean, Zuckerberg as well, with his control of Facebook and Instagram. I mean, these are massive platforms with tremendous influence.
Yeah, and if you post right-wing memes on those platforms, they get radically and quickly amplified. And if you post left-wing or even just pro-democracy memes, they get suppressed. I've been arguing for some time, as does, ironically, Josh Hawley. He wrote a book about this, as did I. Mine was The Hidden History of Big Brother, that those algorithms should be public. They should be required to publish them. If they're going to manipulate the data that we're seeing, we should at least know the dimensions of them and parameters of the manipulation. And that's not even, I mean, that's a modest ask. I mean, frankly, I agree with Josh Hawley that we should just do away with Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act that granted these guys, an end to liability. Right now, if you were to publish in the New York Times or the Washington Post or on CNN or MSNBC or ABC or any other main media outlet, or even on my newsletter, some of the things that show up on Twitter or Facebook or whatnot, you'd be in a whole world of trouble. You could be sued. And these guys are immune from lawsuits because of this one little provision in law in 1996 that everybody from Bill Clinton and Al Gore on the one hand to the Bill Gates and the emerging kind of tech bros believed, and Republicans for that matter, believed would kick off the internet and launch a golden age of everybody having information and everybody having access to the world's knowledge. And it was a great idea, but its time has come and gone. I mean, it's time for Section 230 to go away. And
I'll give them credit for that goal, meaning I'll give them credit for sincerity in that goal. I think now all this stuff is wrapped in some BS goal, and yet the steam engine just keeps picking up more and more steam. And I just also think, Thom, they've successfully, and through the weaponization of some of these things and platforms that you've talked about, created a demonization of immigrants, and they've created the otherness that has, in a way, thrown so many Americans off the scent of what you're talking about, off the scent of the complete takeover of government.
Yeah, it's, again, these are the classic weapons of Caesarists or, strongman type, people who aspire to strongman kind of authoritarian power. Is first you've got to have an enemy. I mean, one of the things I was surprised when I learned this. I was in my 20s and I wanted to write novels, and I've written like 7 or 8 of them. They're just terrible. Two made their way into print, but don't bother reading them. But I took a class. Louise and I took a remarkable class on novel writing back at the Maui Writers Conference, and the guy said, your hero is not the most important character in your book. Everybody thinks he is or she is, but that's absolutely not the case. The villain is the most important character. Superman would just be a boring guy who stopped people from sticking up 7-Elevens if it wasn't for Lex Luthor, right? Batman would just be some rich guy who drives around in a fancy car in a funny outfit if it wasn't for the Joker. You've got to have a supervillain in order to have a superhero. So throughout history, I mean, again, going back to Julius Caesar, throughout history, every wannabe dictator, every wannabe authoritarian always starts out by creating an other that they can point to and saying, that's the supervillain. And, you know, we've got several candidates right now that the Republican Party has offered us, immigrants, trans people, the queer community in general, Black people. You know, there's a few, Muslims, there's a few, but typically they settle on one big one. And Trump has been riding the immigrant one for some time. We'll see how this shakes out over the course of the next 2 years. But
you know, your latest book, I think, in that Hidden History series is The Hidden History of the American Dream. Yeah. And I'm just wondering to what extent what's going on now affects so much of what you speak about in that book, about economic progress and economic setbacks and the concentration of wealth, et cetera.
This is the key to understanding the popularity of Donald Trump. When I was a kid, my father bought a house in 1957. I was 6 years old. He bought the house that I grew up in for $13,000. He was earning $7,500 a year working in a tool and die shop. Back then, the average cost of an American house was twice the average annual salary. Today, the average annual salary for one person, the household salary is higher, but for one person is around $40,000, $43,000, I think it is. And the average cost of a house in the United States is $435,000. It's now 10 to 1. So, you know, there's been this explosion of unaffordability, number one. Number two, when my generation, the boomers, were in our 30s, we controlled 21.5% of all the wealth in America. The generation today in their 30s control 4.6% of all the wealth in America. So the Zoomers and the millennials have been screwed, and they know they've been screwed. They just don't know how or by whom. You know, obviously it was Reagan and Reaganism, you know, which we've had now for 40 years, and Democrats bought into this too. I mean, you know, the Clinton administration as well, just kind of continuing these policies. So the foundation of the American dream, you know, my dad working in a tool and die shop was able to buy a house. He bought a new car every 2 years. He took a vacation for 2 weeks every year, and we traveled around. He retired with a good pension. He was able to put his kids through school. He raised, you know, I was the oldest of 4 boys, you know, and it was a small house. I mean, it was a little 3-bedroom house, 1 bathroom, but it was still, I mean, we thought it was great, you know, it was kind of lower middle class. And you could do that. And today you can't have the 1970s or certainly the 50s or 60s standard of living with even 2 incomes. It takes 2.3 incomes to match the standard of living that you had in 1980 with a single income. And again, you can track this all back to Republican policies, but that connection is almost never made in the media. And certainly the Republicans aren't going to tell you that.
Sure, sure. And I recommend that book, and we're going to have a link to it, The Hidden History of the American Dream. It's just Thom Hartmann's latest. Speaking of latest, want to get you to weigh in on what's happening in Washington. It's a remarkable thing. It's the capture in a different way. It's the capture of the GOP completely, and it would seem 100% or close to it, close enough to it, for the GOP to capture government in this confirmation process that plays out the supplication of these GOP senators to Trump to the point that they're ready to rubber stamp any and all choices and nominees. I mean, the Hegseth nomination, the Bondi nomination, Patel, et cetera. But in Hegseth, you have a guy who is so manifestly incompetent and not up to the task. I'm just talking about, I'm leaving aside his sexual assaults and his drunkenness in the workplace, and the guy's a train wreck. I'm leaving that all out. He's going to run the Department of Defense. It's insane. And yet he is good looking, and he hosted this Fox News show on the weekends that I guess Trump saw enough of, and he said the right things to the point that Trump feels he's my guy. But more to the point I'm making and asking you about, these senators, it would seem the advise and consent part of this game, of the confirmation process, is completely gone.
Yeah, we've seen a complete breakdown of the Republican Party. It has turned from a political party where you have dialogue and debate and a variety of viewpoints into a cult. And where your word fealty, just a complete loyalty, and the utter debasement, the utter humiliation of Joni Ernst yesterday, in the hearings with Pete Hegseth, I think is the iconic moment that tells us that all is lost essentially for the GOP.
Yeah, spend a moment on Joni Ernst, because here's someone who was a victim of sexual assault herself, served in the military. I mean, there's so much, and more to the point, maybe, she's their canary in the coal mine. I think other GOP senators kind of look to her, and the minute she gets she gives them the nod or the wink, they think, oh, well, if Joni's okay with this, I mean,
yeah.
Right?
And what happened apparently was that Elon Musk created a super PAC or a PAC, poured $20 million into it, if the news reports are right, and ran ads in her state, in Iowa, saying, Pete Hegseth is a wonderful guy. He's an American patriot. And, some people are trying to prevent him, and call this number now. And of course, it was, Joni Ernst's number. And she just got slammed. I mean, it's the same way that he bought the election for Donald Trump. So here we have now a Republican Party that lives in terror, frankly, of this strongman who has come right out and said he will politically destroy any Republican who stands up to him. He will primary them, which is the end of their political career. And he clearly has the power and means to do it. And with Musk's money behind him, and all the other billionaire money that's out there now, that's all flowing into Washington, D.C. I don't see how anybody can stop him within the Republican Party anyway.
It's funny, when the Gates nomination never really made it, I thought, maybe it's possible there'll be pushback on a handful. And most presidents get the majority of their nominations through, of course, but these are so extraordinary. And Hegseth is an insanely, incompetent, to use the word again, but extreme might be another word I'd use, example of someone who is just really like out of bounds. And so maybe there'll be pushback on that. But now that I'm seeing Hegseth likely getting the nod, I'm thinking Patel is going to end up running the FBI, even though, he couldn't find the men's room at the FBI. And you have these other Gabbard and RFK Jr., et cetera. They may all get through, Thom.
I think they will. I frankly think they will. I think Gates was an anomaly, and it had to do with his, porking an underage girl. That was just a bridge too far for the Republicans. So Trump got one sacrificial lamb there taken out. But I fully expect all of them to get through. And this is exactly what Vladimir Putin wants. He wants a dysfunctional American government. He wants a crippled American government. He wants an American intelligence service, run by somebody who's friendly with him. He wants Americans not to believe in their country and in their government, not to have faith in it. And the big question in my mind is Donald Trump doing this sort of thing because he's afraid of Putin? Is he doing it because he's been paid off by Putin? Is he being blackmailed by Putin? Will we reach a point? I mean, he's a lame duck president now, or will be next week, where he no longer can run for office, although, he might get the Constitution changed, God only knows. But he'll be 82 in 4 years. So is he going to suddenly be willing to stand up to Putin? I mean, it'll be interesting to see. Or is this just all coincidental that the desires of a strong man running Russia run parallel to the desires of a man who wants to be the strong man running America? I think all those things are possible.
I mean, he does seem oddly in the thrall of Putin, to the point that, when he was standing up next to him during his first term, and there was that question about Russian interference, he was ready to go with with Putin's take on Russian interference in the election as opposed to the intelligence agencies. That's just one example, but I'm just saying he's shown this odd allegiance either to Putin, talking points, or to Putin himself. We come from California, and a lot of our audience is in California, and I really wanted to get your take on a desperate situation in California. We lost our home and neighborhood to fire in 2019. We are on constant alert. I mean, it's crazy to even sustain the kind of anxiety we've had to sustain over the last week or so. But leave us aside, many other Californians are going through the same thing. And in Southern California, we've seen the devastation, and we have an expressed need for federal assistance. Enter Donald Trump and an opposing political party and the kind of bizarre relationship that he seems to demand from those who want something from him. I wonder if you can speak to that, because the GOP has also said, well, we want to see some strings attached to anything we give to California. There's always this, I understand political grandstanding around this, but if you could give me your take on how you see this unfolding, because this is an American tragedy being played out here, and the federal government, and by the way, California pays more into the federal government than any of these states that these senators are squawking from. They're all welfare states. We're the ones who are actually contributing, and now we need something, and they're going to make us jump through hoops. Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, I think it's a crime, and I was going to mention that Mike Johnson, who's from Louisiana, they get over $2 for every dollar that they send to the federal government. California gets less than $1 for every dollar it sends to the federal government. I didn't realize you'd lost your home, Mark. I'm so very sorry. It's got to be just a deeply traumatic experience. I've been trying to have some empathy, trying to understand, try to imagine what it would be like. And every time I get close to seriously imagining it happening to me, it just scares the hell out of me, and I back away from it. I mean, it's just.
Well, I would say running for your life and is a really it's intense.
Yeah.
Evacuating for your life, and we've done it over and over and over again. We pre-evacuated on this one. I'm smiling because it's so bizarre. We weren't threatened by any immediate flames, but the winds alone panic us so much that I literally got an Airbnb miles from my home in mid-city Los Angeles, around the concrete. I mean, you wouldn't walk outside in the area that we're in, but we're happy there because it's safe and we can at least sleep at night. So that's the reverberation psychologically. But the politics of it, it's just despicable the way it's being played out in Washington. And I'm wondering to what extent they really might hold up funding for California.
Well, Trump held up funding for, I think on 6 different occasions, he held up funding for blue states and Puerto Rico during his last term in office. And in some cases, he held up funding for months at a time. So I take him seriously. I take them absolutely seriously. They are going to demand their pound of flesh. These are people who don't believe in the democratic process. They don't believe in American democracy. They don't believe in federalism. They don't believe in the distribution of power in society. They are absolute monarchists, essentially, or Caesarists, or fans of oligarchy anyway. And so this is going to be a battle. But it's just obscene that they're even discussing it. I just, when I heard Mike Johnson say that, I was frankly astonished.
Well, it's rich too from Johnson, because you mentioned Louisiana, and that is a state so full of corruption, with federal dollars be going to all these pockets of corrupt officials, never even makes it into any of the rebuild effort. I just think it's always rich when a Louisiana politician lectures me about strings attached to money.
Yeah, or morality, or
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm with you.
It's only another minute or two that we have with you. I'm just wondering, give us a guide to survivability for those of us who, hope for the best and fear the worst.
I think the most important lesson, we have the benefit of hindsight. We can look at other countries that have been through this, whether it's Germany back in the day, or whether it's Hungary right now, or Russia, and learn the lessons of that. We're very fortunate to have people like Timothy Snyder and Ruth Ben-Ghiat, the contemporary chroniclers doing the work that William Shearer did, in my father's generation with the rise and fall of the Third Reich. And so we have a much better understanding of where things are likely going to go and what weapons and tools will be used and how to fight back. And the main way to fight back is through the channels of public dialogue. And that's why, of course, the billionaires have been so anxious to control those. Social media is arguably the largest one now. We find that people who get most of their news from social media were 20% more likely to vote for Donald Trump in the last election than people who get their news from mainstream media. And had it not been for social media, I think you could build a strong case that Trump would not be, coming into the White House, and not even close.
100%. I totally agree. I mean,
so,
yeah. So go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean
to interrupt. Yeah. Even though we're, shoveling sand on the shore with a teaspoon here against the tide of these massive algorithms and these billionaires, I think that we have to do everything we can in whatever venues we can to be as loud as we can and speak out and get engaged, show up at your local Democratic Party, volunteer, become a precinct committee person, join some of the great groups out there. Indivisible is probably the best known, but there's a bunch of them. Find one that follows your passion, and now is the time. It may be too late a couple of years from now to get politically active. Now is the moment.
Last thing, Thom, say that which you're speaking of, which is make your voice heard. I think Trump does want to be popular in his own way, and if there's enough noise around certain issues, he is capable of changing his position. We certainly know he's capable of changing his position, but I mean, of backing off something that he finds is costing him in terms of popularity. And so I know it's a noisy environment, but man, that's all the more reason that noise has to be made, I think.
You're absolutely right. And Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, really demonstrated this. He picked on half a dozen countries, right? And she was the only one who stood up and gave him a bloody nose. She just punched back. She called him names. She made fun of him. And he just backed off. He hasn't said a word about Mexico since she took him down. So, yeah.
He had that same relationship with Nancy Pelosi, as I recall. He kind of respected her, and he said as much.
I think he feared her. I don't think Trump is capable of respecting women.
Probably true, too. Look, the Hidden History series is terrific, and you should check it out. The latest is The Hidden History of the American Dream. We'll have a link to it under this video. And, of course, Thom Hartmann, the Hartmann Report, and ThomHartmann.com has a bunch of different links to all of Thom's work. Look, I put up the bat beam maybe once a month or so to try to see if I can get you through, and I'll probably do it again because we really enjoy our time with you. I just think you're a truth teller, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, anytime. It's always an honor and pleasure to hang out with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thom Hartmann, everybody. So long, Thom. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.